All right, so welcome back to Intro to Sociology. Last lecture for this semester. Where do we go from here? By Dr. King. Um, so I always like to end, particularly my intro lectures, with this particular reading because I believe that this reading does a good job of summarizing at least my approach to sociology and to introducing our students to sociology. Um, and although the text was written in, well, I don't know when it was written, but I want to say it was published in like 1968, 1969. It is extremely relevant today. So I want to give a little background before we go into it. So you're talking about the 1960s. Dr. King is seeing the middle to the late 60s, starting to see some of the victories of the civil rights movement and the Civil Rights Act of 64, the Voting Rights Act of 65, the Fair Housing Act of, I believe, 67 or 68. And so Dr. King is starting to see that the 10-year battle, the 10-year journey for freedom and the eradication of Jim Crow is starting to come around. But there is another aspect to this movement that Dr. King did not foresee. There are these economic barriers and these class barriers that are existing within our society that are intersectionally connected to the issue of race in the United States. He talks about that in the text as well. There's a famous quote that says, what's the point of desegregating a lunch counter if you can't afford the hamburger, right? He wasn't the first person to say that. The first person to say that was actually a brother by the name of Bear Rustin. But what it does is it speaks to the issues or the interconnected issues of race and class in this movement. So he talks a little bit about that in the text. But overall, what Dr. King is doing in this book, or where do we go from here, is he's asking the question, now that we have seemingly come to the end of this first phase of the movement of reaching racial equality, which it seems as though we're not completely there yet, but we're starting to make advancements in that area. What is the next step? Where are we going to go now? He's also starting to realize that we're getting ushered into a new era in American history. This is the civil rights movement is, of course, transitioning into a much more radical movement, and not just civil rights movement. I'm sorry, the racial movement in America is becoming more radical with the onset of the Black Power movement, the onset of the Brown Power movement. In addition to that, one of the biggest influences on American life at this time is the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War is hitting home more and more in the late 60s as more and more people, particularly Black people, are being called off to fight in Vietnam. There is a certain globalization that is happening in the United States as technology is advancing at incredible rates. And what Dr. King is starting to critique now is starting to have a much larger effect on the US's position as a global superpower. He is now transitioned from being a race leader and a political activist to a global phenomenon. His thoughts, his ideas are now influencing people in Sweden, in Russia, in Australia, in South Africa. He is moving towards being a world leader. And he is stepping out of the race conversation. And he's now stepping into the conversation of nationhood, right? He's now stepping into the conversation of global politics. And he's taking his same ideas of nonviolence, of resistance in nonviolent ways, of equality and of justice, and he's urging people to apply this on this global political scale. And this is the time where now people are starting to become even more afraid of his influence, because it was okay if he was just talking about Black and white equal rights. But if these ideas start to get into the politics of major political and national leaders, this could very well affect the way in which countries run, particularly capitalist countries, are run. We could now find ourselves into a global revolution where people, not just of a certain race, but now people of a certain class and people of a certain oppressed nature, not just Black, but people of color and non-people of color, could take this same influence and rise up against countries, not just in the United States, but in Saudi Arabia, in Russia, in Korea, in Italy, in France, in Botswana, all over the world. The ideas that are becoming important in this text are ideas that people begin to fear, particularly people who wanted everything to be along the status quo, which is one of the major reasons why Dr. King was killed. Speaking about race, that's one thing. Being a race leader, that's one thing. Being a national, political, global leader and bringing these ideas to that level, no, because now it messes up the way in which the world can possibly be run. And that's very different than wanting to eradicate Jim Crow in the American South, right? So some people believe that, right? And so Dr. King talks about, he continues to push his ideas of nonviolence, and continues to provide a critique, a very strong critique of the United States' position in the Vietnam War, and offers ways in which to help end the war, as well as offer ways to promote and maintain an economic system that is much more balanced for the American economy. But there's one part of this chapter, and of the book itself that I want us to delve deep into, because all of these things are things that we've talked about and discussed throughout the semester. But if you recall, there's one story that he tells, and that he reminds us of, and that is the story of Rip Van Winkle. In the text, he talks about Rip Van Winkle, and he talks about how this fairy tale of this man falling asleep and then waking up 20 years later is a tale that has been told to young people and Americans and Europeans for centuries. And he says But a lot of people miss the point of this story. A lot of people focus on the fact that there was a man who slept for 20 years and then he woke up. But most people skip over the part of the story that is the most significant. You see, when Rip Van Winkle went up to the hotel to go to sleep, he went to the lobby and there was a picture of King George in the lobby. He fell asleep, and when he woke up 20 years later, there was a picture of George Washington in the lobby. And Dr. King asked, what is the significance of that transition? And his conclusion is that the significance of the story is not how long Rip Van Winkle slept, but when he slept. It wasn't just important that he slept for 20 years. The most important thing was that he slept through one of the most pivotal eras in world history. He slept through the Revolutionary War, which is why this, what was it, Bunker Hill? I can't remember which battle it was, but whatever the first battle was in the Revolutionary War, it's called the shot heard around the world. Why? Because it was the Revolutionary War that literally changed the entire world. One of the few wars between two countries, well, actually multiple countries, that would eventually change the course of history. It would not just affect the United States, it would affect all of Europe, it would affect all of Asia, it would affect every single country in the world. And this revolution happened, and Rip Van Winkle was asleep. He went to sleep, saw King George. Next, when he woke up, he saw George Washington. Did not know who George Washington was because he slept through the Revolutionary War. And so Dr. King concluded that Rip Van Winkle not only slept, but slept through one of the most important times in Earth's history. And he uses that and applies that to his audience. And he's saying many of us are awake, or not awake, but many of us are living through some of the most pertinent times in Earth's history, through the Civil Rights Movement, through the Vietnam War, through this new women's rights movement, through this age of technological advancement. And although we are living, many of us are still asleep. Many of us are living, but sleeping. And it would be a shame for you to live through and be alive through some of these very significant parts of Earth's history and have contributed nothing to the course of this history. And I take that same thought and I also apply it to this class. You all are young people who are living through the age of Black Lives Matter, the age of COVID-19. You all are living through the Me Too movement. You all are living through when we're getting ready to come into, many people argue, another recession. This will probably be the first time that we actually have two recessions so close together. I think ever in Earth's history. You had a Great Depression in the 30s, and then I don't think another recession happened until the 80s, and then at least in the 1900s. This one will be 2008 and then 2020, 12 years apart, or 22, so 14, maybe 14 years apart. So we are living in wild times. Some things good happening, some things bad. but very interesting, very wild, very unique times in Earth's history. And Dr. King is saying, and what I'm saying in this class, and what this class is trying to do is wake you up. To ensure that you do not go to sleep. Because it would be a shame if 50 years from now, your kids or your grandkids or your grandnieces, nephews, whatever, come to you and they read about 2022 in their history books. They read about 2022 in their textbooks or text devices. And they read about COVID, and they read about Black Lives Matter, and they read about Me Too. And they read about all of these different things that are happening in social change and the resistance efforts of so many people in so many cities all over the world, and the war in Ukraine, and they're reading all this stuff. And they say, mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, auntie, uncle, whatever identity. You were alive during this time. You were in college during this time. What did you do to contribute to these efforts? What did you do to make change? Are you going to tell them that you were involved? Are you going to tell them that you helped to make people's lives better? Are you going to tell them that you helped to try to bring a stop to the negativity or the bad things that were happening during this time? Or like Rip Van Winkle, will you have to tell them that you were asleep? And that question can be answered today. That question can be answered in this time. And this class seeks to ensure that when you answer that question, you can answer that question proudly. All in all, it's up to you. How you handle the times in which you live in, how you handle the times that you are not only living, but you are able-bodied and you are in your right mind. Times that you can either contribute to or times that you can challenge. But it's up to you. And so this class hopefully helps you to make the right decision by raising the level of consciousness, raising your level of consciousness, and then hopefully inspiring you to use that consciousness to apply in positive ways. In whatever way you want to. It can be through arts, it can be through music, it can be through education, it can be through political involvement, it can be in many different ways, but whatever way you decide to do it, you use that consciousness to help contribute to the times in a positive way. That's the goal of this class. That is my goal as a sociology instructor, sociology professor. And I hope that that was done, and I hope that that was effective. And I hope I've been effective in doing that, to help wake you up if you've been asleep, or to help keep you awake if you were falling asleep, or socially. So that is my goal. That is my hope for you. And although you learned a lot about sociology, sociological concepts and theories and ideas, and you've read books or you've read excerpts from books and chapters and articles, the most important thing is that you use these tools to take to your own community, to take to your own society, to take to the people that you are around. And you use these tools and you use this class as a guide to help advance the thoughts around fairness and justice and equality, so that you can tell the future generation that you were not asleep during some of the most important times in this country's history. So with that being said, that is it. Class is over. Make sure that you study for your exam. Make sure that you have hopefully you completed all your assignments. And again, if you have any questions, reach out to me. It's been a pleasure. It's been an honor. And go in peace.